Okay, some late night drawing thoughts. I've got a whole collection of these sketchbooks, which I think I've mentioned in other videos. Advice to younger artists. It's a great idea to just keep a private sketchbook and just draw whatever the hell you want in it. It's like a private testing ground. You don't have to show it to anybody unless you want to, of course. So this is number 24, and I happen to be going through a whole bunch of these, looking for ideas, just kind of reviewing stuff. And got all kinds of wacky things in here. I just like draw whatever occurred to me. Heads, weird aliens, all kinds of stuff. But I came across this, so more on the art theory side. And can ignore this guy. It's just like a drawing of these creatures I like to draw. But I was making notes about lighting. So what this talk is going to be is just some basic suggestions about how to use lighting in comics. And it's by no means, again, like I've said in other videos, going to be exhaustive because there's too many of these things to cover. But this did prompt something that I wanted to get across. And another sort of caveat at the beginning is this is fairly simple stuff, right? What I'm going to show. And it's again in the category that people might say, oh, it's very simple. Why are you showing that? The thing is that if you build up from a ground level, from very simple things to more complex things, but you have a firm foundation, that's going to give you solidity. So for example, with form, I was talking in another video about if you learn to draw simple forms, like these kinds of forms, that's just like the cross, like you'd use on a head. If you projected those lines on a head, if you learn something simple like this, you can build up to more complex forms. But if you're drawing something inaccurately, even basic forms, why bother trying to draw more complex ones? You're just going to create frustration for yourself. So it's kind of like that with other aspects too, like lighting. So I'm going to start from just some simple, really basic ideas and then just point out a couple of things. And then maybe look at one or two comics that might help. So if you go to drawing books, there's very common basic stuff like, I'm going to zoom in a bit. The good old pole. And, there'd be the sun way up here somewhere. And there's like, this is the base where the pole's hitting the ground. And you have the sun coming down. So depending on the angle, and depending, of course, on the perspective or whatever you're drawing, you're going to have the shadow. So if you think of a side view, if you've got the sun very steeply above, the shadow is going to be very short. This is really basic stuff. If the sun's coming at a steeper angle, you're going to get a much longer shadow. And so forth. If you get it really steep, the shadow is going to be stretching really out. So, like late in the day, you're walking home. There you are walking along, and you got your super long shadow because the sun's really low. This foot's contacting, so the other one might be like that. I've drawn this incredibly badly, but it's again for the purpose of explanation. So the angles are coming in like this, right? Like, and you'd have a head there, and then you can work out roughly where the arms are going to be. It's a bit stylized, but you see the point is that it's stretched out, right? If this foot's off the ground, it's not, that there's going to be a gap. Whereas if it was contacting, you'd have it like that, showing that it's contacting. This is really basic stuff. I'm trying to do this because I'm a lazy bastard. I'm drawing it without even drawing. This is just shapes, but it's to illustrate principles that come into play even when you do fancier stuff. But say you want to show that foot just barely above the ground, how would you do it? And if the light's coming from over here, if the light's coming from straight up, it would be one thing. Let's say it's still coming from over here. you go like that, right? There's the leg, you know. But you can see the little gap there. And if it was from above, it would be, you'd have some kind of foot, maybe a pant leg. If the lighting was, you know, the guy's shoes like this. If the lighting was straight above, you might have something like this, like the contact point would be there, and the rest of his body would be there. Now, say you have the light somewhat in front, you might have this kind of thing. And you'd have to make decisions when rendering how much to close that in. But the light's coming from the front, and then, you know, if the light's coming from the front, you might even suggest a bit of shadow behind here. This would be the shadow of the guy's foot. I think you get the idea. So, moving on. I want to move on, but I also want to mess around with this a bit more to make it look a little bit better. That's a little bit too big. Anyway, if the light was in front of this guy, you would see this more of the shadow of the rest of him. Like, I'm going to draw a bit more of him in. See, his head's there. And the light's coming from above. You're going to have, yeah, you're going to have his head back over here somewhere. And then you might have shadows in there. You might have a bit of shadow under his arm. What you're trying to do is, like, think of the block forms. Let's zoom out a bit here. Think of the block forms, the volumes. This guy's legs are a bit short. And maybe he's looking over this way. But the idea is that where you place the shapes of light, the blacks, are going to either create a suggestion of form or kill it. This guy's got a pole coming out of his shoulder now. So these will be some similar things. I had them in this sketchbook, but I'm going to try and recreate them. And for the purpose of explaining this a little bit more, sort of repeating the same thing in a different form, a more diagrammatic form, imagine you have the same thing repeated several times. So it's something really basic like this. You got an oval, kind of a diamond, implying that's a drawing. I'm going to do it. Doesn't have to be exact. That's really crappy. I'm here to teach you bad drawing. Anyway, those are supposed to be the same. I could have photocopied them, but again, like I said earlier, I'm a lazy bastard. The thing is that in line, you don't have any information about what these are doing in terms of space, right? Like your eye, they're just flat cutouts. They could be flat cutouts, look down from above, like straight down from above. This could be a perspective drawing. You really don't know. Your eye can sort of make assumptions. But depending on what you do with shadow, your mind, I guess I said eye, but it's really your mind, your perception, is going to start making different conclusions. So, for example, in case one, and there's almost endless variations of this, but say here, I put an oval here of, you're going to assume that's a shadow of a light. Your eye just starts thinking that. But if I do it here, it's like it's drifting off the page and you're not seeing the shadow ends at the edge of that. Now, in both cases, you're assuming that this object is above. So, and then let's think of a third case, like say the lighting angle is different. You can have something like this. The light's coming from over here. And say I work with that. Let's get a pencil. So say that's showing that the light's coming like this, the rays of light. So that will give me some information about I can have a much bigger shadow here of this base. So I could do this. And this is like doing it a little bit technically, you know, like technical. It's not very technical, but it's trying to stick to the rules. And I'll talk about breaking the rules later. See, so now what's missing from this? Okay, you've got this floating in space above this is what we're implying. And the shadow, we see almost all of it. And then below is the shadow. By placing this black shadow here, we've created that much space between the object and the shadow. But what's missing here, of course, is there's a little chip of this oval that's missing. So if you go down here, and of course, in this scheme, it's getting bigger. So it's going to be here somewhere. Which is how shadows fall in real life. Like, if you go look at stuff carefully, and once you understand these principles, you go look around in real life. I don't even know if I can do it with some of my favorite objects here, but I think I probably can. Well, see, the shadows are a bit foggy, but see how here the shadow of this shoe form is inside, but then it breaks out over here, and the rest falls down below. But depending on where the shadow is, defines the contact. So see how when the corner's touching, you get that. When you go out, it gets softer, which is another aspect of lighting. You're not going to use that in black and white comic book inking because you don't have gray tones if you're just doing line art. But it's all interesting stuff to learn about lighting. Let's try a different form, actually. Let's get one of my other shoe creatures, or let's get this. So here I am digressing myself, but it's fun. And see, for example, here, this shadow is crossing and then it comes out over onto here. I digress myself onto this. I'll go back to the drawing. What this reminds me of, though, is it's my constant reminder to people is to prove things to yourself, okay? Prove them to yourself. You can learn them by very simple means. Here, this is just like me with a light. I've got my light set up to film this video, but it's best if you start with a simple point form light, like even your iPhone light or simple sunlight. But the idea is that you get one light and you start looking at forms, like when you're a little kid and you're on a lazy Sunday and it's raining and you're just looking at something. You start trying to understand things for yourself. You don't do it because a book told you or even because I told you. But you go and try and figure out some of these things, how they actually work. And what you discover is wonderfully fascinating, which is there are laws to these things that are repeatable and consistent. It's not just random that, on Tuesday the lighting works one way, Friday it's different. No, there's actual principles that I'm showing, and you can maybe see from what I've explained here, even enough now, like if you want to show contact in your cartooning, see my finger's contacting this now. There's a light over here, so you're getting a shadow there. When I go like this, it goes outside the form. And why do you study these things? You study these to internalize them in yourself so that you understand the principles. You could do a very detailed exact rendering like they used to do in the old academies, or they get people to draw casts for like days and days. They still do that in some ateliers, with a life model, or they would draw from casts and models, fixed models, and progress to life drawing. There is a whole order of progression of learning, which would be hard to replicate now unless you go to one of those realist painting academies. And there are some very good ones. I don't know the names of them, but one or two. But the point is, if you internalize these principles of the world and of art, then you have a tool and you can play with it. And I'll get later to some, if I work it in here, to some Kirby and Toth comics and see their approaches to this stuff. The point is that you learn it sort of a little more academically, and then you can play around with it. If you don't do that, and it's like this with any aspect of drawing and art, like perspective, anatomy, page composition, storytelling, whatever. If you don't study any of it in a more rigorous way, you don't have to be super rigorous, but just really start getting into the behind the scenes. If you don't do that, you're just guessing and you're just kind of fumbling around with a bunch of random habits. Everybody can choose their own path. I mean, for me, I'm always like, I want to understand it better. Yeah, there's a time to be free and draw and cartoon like crazy and just make up whatever, but there's a time to understand stuff. So, okay, so back to where I was. And that's kind of covered some of it, but I've got one or two more things here to suggest. So, yeah, so for here, I didn't project the rest of this, but say I wondered where the rest of this went. Let's zoom in a little bit. It would be the same thing, like I'm just projecting the corners. Say the light in this case is only spreading out a little bit. These lines in pencil are meant to represent the rays of light. That corner would be there. So you might have something like that. Oh good, I just thought of another thing to show you with the next one. But before I do that, see, remember the key point at the beginning I was saying is these basic outlines are meant to be exactly the same. So what we're doing is, by changing the black shapes, the shadows, which your eyes and mind are going to take those as shadows, by changing those, you are implying different angle of light and different distances and things, right? Like this piece of paper looks like it's higher, whatever this thing is floating higher above. If I'd moved the shadow way down here, of course, you'd see that it was way further. Let's do that in the last one. And say that the light's coming from straight above, but say here, the surface it's contacting is way below, and say there's a curved form. Say there's a saddleback, okay, like say there's a saddleback type form here. I don't know if you can see that. My wobbly drawing. Okay, so it's like a curved shape. Now this shadow is coming down. What's going to happen? Is it going to be straight across, like here? No, it can't be, because the light, where it hits, let's say it's hitting here, you're going to get a curved shape. So you're going to get something like this happening. Right, because, and then, you know, of course, inside here, you'd probably have this, like, if the light's straight above, this basically would just, I'm not going to use the marker up because I'm cheap and I want to save my markers, but you'd probably have something barely like this curved here with this all. You'd also have those other shadows. And if this is a rendering like in a comic book panel, you'd have more stuff going on. And in fact, this may or may not be a great design choice, right, by the way it is, because it's a big lump of black that your eye goes right to, and you'd have to balance it out by putting other things in black in other places. But I think it illustrates the idea that just with these simple methods, you can create different illusions of space. Maybe I'll go to one final thing here, which is another diagram. Let me just recreate this one I had over here. Okay, so let's say I have a sphere. It's a wobbly sphere, okay. And I have a triangle. I'm going to try and do this properly so it illustrates my proposition. The demands of YouTube videos. Here we are. The cool thing about YouTube is that you can talk to people and explain things in a way that, like when I was making all these notes, I've got tons and tons of them, bins of them, you know, they're sort of to myself, but it wasn't like an active medium like this. Anyway, look, so imagine that we have a wall here. We've got this triangle piece of cheddar cheese, and we've got an orange. Now, you could do different things with lighting, right? If the lighting was coming like this, I might do it in pencil and erase it if I kept my trusty eraser around here, which I probably didn't. Anyway, if the contact point, if the center is there, you're going to have something like this. If you have a light angle coming this way. Oops. Right? Because you're going to have an oval there. In perspective, it's a sphere, but you can't just draw a straight circle. You're seeing a projection of it. But let's say, where's my darn eraser? Did my assistant not put it here? Oh, here it is, except that's the bad eraser. See if it even works. It's useless. No, it's a smeary, useless eraser. Yeah, it's ruining my YouTube video. Oh well. You guys are all compassionate. All right. Let's make a different light angle, which is really the one I wanted to illustrate. Say you had a light coming almost this way. Because you're the master, you're the god, the goddess, you can do whatever you want. Say it's coming over that way, and you have this kind of thing. What's going to happen to the lighting here if you want to follow sort of quote-unquote realistic? So if this is the interior of this sphere, and that's the base, like that, if this was glass, that's the base. Say the contact point is there, that it's that high above the ground. This perspective is going like that. That's like the center line through this. So if the light's coming this way, though, the light rays are just going to be going over. Checking that I'm doing what I wanted to do. Yes. So that means that if they're just going over like that, it should be falling in perspective a little bit. Anyway, okay. The base of the oval is going to be like this. Onto this wedge of cheddar. Let's put a little light tone here just to make it look like it's three-dimensional. Okay, but what's going to happen to the rest of the shadow? Well, it has to go somewhere, right? And then what's going to happen with the shadow of this cheddar block? It's going to go across to the wall. And then because the edge is straight, this like is meant to be vertical. And the light's just, I'm doing a simple one because the light's not on complex angles, it's just straight across. I did that on purpose to make it simple. So the top of the projection of the top edge would be this line here. And this would be like that. And then so you'd have that. And then what about the rest? Well, you'd have to, you can see that the rest of this would have to project across. And this would be the top limit where the center line is. That's the center line there, hitting there. If you can see that, boom, boom. I'll do it in pan a bit. This is like the center of the thing in the inside. This is where it's contacting the ground. Dots. That's just projecting the center line. That's an imaginary line. It's not lighting. This is where if it went through the, like glass through everything. Okay, so that's where the top of the sphere of the shadow would be. So in the end, that's the kind of shadow you would get, right? I'm just outlining it to make it a little clearer on the video. So that's doing it kind of technically, right? Like what happens when you really put lights on real things. And this is just one example. I mean, I'm already at 25 minutes, so I could make this video way longer, but what I'm trying to get to here is if you start fiddling around with things like this, you start understanding. It may or may not seem complicated. Hopefully I've made it seem clear, but out of very simple principles, you get more and more complex elaborations, and that's what we see around us when we see multicast shadows. I haven't even gone into things like bounce light, which you can see in things like here. There's fill light coming in. See, for example, how soft, because we have a diffuse, I've got a ring light over here, an old drafting lamp. It's got a very big, wide source of light that's very soft. So you don't get very sharp shadows that you would from a small point source. But again, like I said earlier, not all of that matters quite as much with comic book inking and drawing, because you'd use that more in rendering, like painting with tones and values and colors. But anyway, the basic idea again is if you learn these things in a simple way, build up your understanding of it, the technical part of it, and I should probably, like I always say, do more videos on these things. If you go beyond that, then you can, and you get a grasp of that, you can go beyond that and start exaggerating and playing around with it. So let's actually clear the deck here for a second. Just give me a moment. I'm going to put away sketchbook 24. I'm going to grab some comics and see what I can get up to by looking through them. I've got some, let's zoom back for the moment. We've got your wonderful Jack Kirby Forever People, number 11. We've got the Rook with some great different comics. Alex Toth's Bravo for Adventure, we'll have a look at that. And then I've got some other Alex Toth comics here. But let's look at Kirby first, because he's like one polarity, right? So I'm talking about shadows. Now, was Kirby technical? I got a really good glare going off this comic here. Oh well. Was Kirby technical? No, he wasn't. I believe he knew all this stuff. He studied in art school when he was younger, and you know, I'm sure he could have done it. And in some of his drawings, you can see that he does more of it. But when he developed this style, the further he went on, which I just love, the exaggeration, is this funky mix of allusions or references to realistic stuff, but very non-literal. Like if you look here, just even on this great cover, Devil Lance is firing his lance at these crazy hippies, the Forever People. What I was saying about shadows, like see, he's put cast shadows in the ground under the figures here, but they're not. There's no attempt to draw them realistically. Like where's the shadow of his head, Mark Moonrider's head falling on the ground? It isn't really there. There's just the suggestion or inference of things. Like say, for example, what's her name, Beautiful Dreamer. There's kind of a Ripley shadow here, but he hasn't even darkened in the whole thing because he was all about design. See, like really, if you had a light from above here and you had her shadow falling on the wall like this, he's got a bit of the shadow of her arm and a bit of the shadow of the rest of her, but then he stops and turns it just into a shape. And it's the same with lots of stuff that he does. Like, say here, the shadow of his, I forget this guy, Viken is his name, yeah. It's coming back to me. I'm 11 years old again. He's alluded to it and put this a bit into shadow, but it's really not technically, you know, worried over. Or like, say here, he's got this, what is it, mother box? See here, he's got this. And he's got the leg, Viken's leg, which is coming here. So you'd have cylindrical forms like I was showing in the earlier part of my video, and you'd have a shadow here, which you can see that Kirby knew this. See how that's curved? So he kind of alluded to it because it's like it gives your eye or your mind that little nudge. And it's just like a prompt is a better word, right? But then he goes wild and just does whatever he wants here. But he has to narrow it down and end it there. It looks like that might be the thickness of this device. Let's look inside and see what we can find. And what's interesting is things like, in some places he puts in these shadows, other places for design reasons he leaves them out. Like see here, I don't know, let's zoom in so you can see it clearly. You've got a tangle of legs. What's this guy's name? Seraphan, the cowboy hat guy? That's his leg coming out there. That's not a shadow. You've got the shadow of this lance suggested with an extra stripe, which is kind of interesting. Is that a floorboard? Who knows? These are like action lines. But you've got the lance very powerfully coming in. You've got Mark Moonrider dodging all these wonderful dynamic poses. But he hasn't put any shadows here because he probably, I'm going to guess, he didn't want to clutter it up. Like if you put all these shadows here, it would just plug the whole thing up. He did put little bits though, but as pure design, like Viking the Black's legs are splayed in action fashion. So he's just put a pure stripe here. Now here he's got Seraphan's arm, elbow. And look here, let's zoom in more if we can stand it. See here, he's got the elbow. And it's an interesting example because the elbow's like this, and he's put the shadow showing that it's contacting there, and then he's got the shadow blobbing, and Kirby does these blob shadows. So it's showing that, like I was talking about earlier, that there's a contact point there. And these, to me, when I look at this, and I hadn't pre-planned any of this, when I look through this, you can see that he has the knowledge, he knows how this stuff works. But he's cartooning the crap out of it in a beautiful way. Jack, there was none like you. The gusto, sheer gusto. See here, like he's got Devil Lances suddenly turned up in a dramatic 2-page spread reveal. Look at that. I haven't looked at this in so long. I just bought these at a comic shop about a year ago. They were in the remainder bin or whatever, and the cheapo bin, and I haven't looked at them since then, but I found them. And synergy happened when I was looking through my sketchbook, and then I was like looking at these Kirby comics. It's like, oh, I got to talk about shadows. Anyway, look, see here? He's just done a completely random zigzag design shadow. This is the cast shadow of Devil Lance is the character's name. But he's not concerned about like, where's the projection, like I was saying. He's got the light kind of generally from over here because the shadow's going that way. But then this would be his leg. This might be sort of the shadow of his body, but it becomes pure design element. But in places where he wants to show depth and contact or almost contact, see how here there's the lance, and then there's this angle that your eye can see. That's the shadow of the lance, and it's just above this stack of books. So what's fascinating is that he uses these cues or clues for your eye, these prompts. But then other times he just does completely random design things. Like there's just enough doorway there, this crash doorway. Yeah, like he stabbed the, in this page, he stabbed the door with the lance and then all the wood shattered. So this is storytelling. We have the remnants of it here. But then he's just basically gone into design. He hasn't even put anything here. Maybe Jack was busy, I don't know. But and here he's got this angle. Let's see what else we can find. So remember I said about selective shadows. Like see here on this panel, he's left out the shadows for design. He's got them off, what's this? Hairy fool, you dare joust with Devil Lance. He's saying, who has never known defeat, back off and live. You crow too soon, hunter. I forget this guy's name. What is his name? Big Bear, it says it there. My synapses from long ago are kicking back in, but I'm also cheating by reading the captions. So anyway, look, he's got stylized shadows is the point. These are like super wacky stylized cast shadows. And in other places, like I said already, he just leaves them out entirely. It's all about design with Kirby. Power and design. Gotta love it. I could have gotten a high-paying job in drafting. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Are we going to extract any more pithy nuggets of wisdom from Kirby? Well, as far as shadows in my topic here, which I'm trying my best to stick to, there's a few more examples, maybe like say here. See, he's got the knee contacting and again a bit of a shadow. But then instead of the shadow following the form of the leg, he just turns it into a design shape. So it's kind of really random. Let's switch to another artist, okay? So let's contrast this with Alex and see what he does with shadows. Well, first of all, I'm opening this randomly. This is his magnum opus, Bravo for Adventure. And, well, that's The Rook by, who's that by? Lee Elias. But here's Alex's story. And what I see right away is he's not as wild with the way he treats shadows. But he's doing the same thing, which is he's stylizing it and putting things in and leaving them out. He's really not pedantic about getting every last shadow in. So like even the way he's drawn Jesse Bravo's figure here, which I just love. It's silhouette and outline based. And then he's gone inside, which is suggestions, but he has not rigorously drawn every shadow. He's drawing the form and the volumes. I guess I'm switching over to a discussion about drapery too here, and he's hit us with some big graphic shapes, like those 4 wrinkles kind of form a graphic pattern, like a ladder going up the arm. And same thing here, he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, so it balances. And I bet when he was inking this, he's almost doing it with timing and rhythm, because you can kind of see that energy in there. But you can see that he's put in much more realistic lighting. And it's not a good or bad thing I'm saying here, because I love Kirby. But Jack Kirby probably wouldn't do stuff like this. He's got the shadow of the propeller drawn from a much more realistic way, that oval form. But here he's done editing. Like he could have had a shadow underneath here and tried to round this volume of this cowling of this plane. But he didn't do that. Alex just left it as a design shape. And I'm sure on purpose to balance out this page. Because if he'd gone in and put a ton of stuff there, your eye would notice that and not really just the graphic punch of these beautiful shapes. The way these shapes take you up to Jesse Bravo's face. Of course, this gets you in there too. He balanced it out with the stability of this big block with the 2 chunks of captions. Anyway, we're on the hunt for shadows, so let's have a look-see and what we can find. And yeah, like say down here, first of all, this is much more realistic to be done. Like you've got the volume of the neck, this side's in shadow, and then you've got the cast shadow, some of it from his chin on this shoulder here. But then here, because I guess it's not a super moody scene, Alex wanted to show the lighting on the face, but he didn't draw it right in completely. So what he did is try and get this in the frame. He's got the guy's face. Mr. Gangster. And I'm not going to try and draw it all exactly, but I'm just trying to illustrate the concept here. He's got this hat. She actually had a funny way of drawing fedoras, Alex. But, sorry, that's probably a bit much, but it's true. It's more like a boating hat. But anyway, the idea is that the lighting, see, followed the bridge of the nose. It's following the form. And he's gotten even a bit behind the nose here. And he's even suggested a bit of the shadowing there. And that's all much more realistic than what a Jack Kirby would have done, because, you know, it's working with a light source that's coming from this angle, from above, a bit off to the side. And he's done it again here. He's continued, for continuity's sake, he's added it in there. And even in panels like this, let's move over to this one. See here, this shadow? To me, that implies that, See that you can see the lighting from above because the tab on Jesse Bravo's jacket there, see he's done a realistic shadow here, and he's got that thing I was talking about where it contacts. It slims down because it's touching there, so you can see that that's where it's contacting his waist. Becomes kind of a graphic design element, and the lighting is generally from above, like from here. And what he did here, though, is he implies almost the shadow of Jesse Bravo's hand on his back. So you're thinking, why is that there? That's why that's there, I think, because it gives a bit of interest, but it also implies a bit of shadowing. But he hasn't gone crazy, and this is where design comes in. See, he's got the shadow here of the man's coat on his leg, the gangster, but he hasn't gone crazy in here shading this arm dark. So I think what you have is examples of always choices between how much and how little. You know, like if you go too far, you're going to sacrifice design. And if you go way too far, you're going to plug the entire thing up. So I think by this stage in his career, Alex is very careful in his kind of choices and that balance between realism and the needs of it and the needs of pure graphic design. Like he had this style where it's cartoony, he wants that punch, you know, which is what I always loved about him. You've got that graphic boldness, and he's not scared to often use just sheer silhouettes. And silhouettes, I should say, like in this panel, they have lots of uses, but they give variety and interest, and they involve the reader to imagine more. But they also can be a device to focus on the lettering. So if you're not giving the viewer that much information in the silhouettes, because they're silhouetted, I mean, you're not drawing it all up. There's really not that much to look at. You just assess it, you get the basic pose, which is what it does. It emphasizes the big important pose elements, and it can give it that kind of strength. But then after you've done that, you're going to focus on the lettering. So it's a way of kind of distilling it down. And that's another one of these dials you can tune in comics, is like how complex versus how simple. So, and like here's another beautiful example in this panel. Down here, I've digressed a little bit into storytelling because I'm not strictly looking for cast shadows, which is my original hunt, which maybe I'll go back to. Try to make these videos have a topic, but they end up with me rambling. But anyway, here's a beautiful silhouette implying it's maybe sunset, the angle's low, and there's a sliver of light hitting our main two characters. So it's a fantastic way to get the scene set up, give it drama, not have to draw everything, and focus on, make the viewer focus on what we need to focus on. But again, here's examples of lighting. And contrasted to someone like Jack Kirby, these are much more realistic. They're still not super realistic, but it's more realistic. The way he's sticking to the angle of light and what would be thrown into shadow. He's not super stylized it the way Jack Kirby would. And I'm looking for more examples, but I think I'm probably nearing the end. See, as the story goes on, it gets more moody, doesn't it? You see how the pages are, I zoom out, the pages were lighter up here, generally open, and they get like darker, more night, much starker. The lighting becomes more extreme. And here's an example of long shadows that I was talking about earlier. This panel here. See how those shadows are stretching, and even coincidentally, I didn't rehearse this, but this is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. See how the angle of light would be like this, because if you trace a line between the trooper's boot and the shadow, you can see there's a gap, and the shadows are stretching because the light's quite low angle from whatever light's back behind them over here. And the trooper is off the ground because neither shadow is contacting the heel of his or toe of his boots. So again, you can see right away, like, someone like Alex understood all this stuff. It was in his mind, that knowledge. And it's informing his decisions. So that gives him the flexibility to do different things with all this different lighting. And that's why when you see these pages, they look so magical, and they are, of course. There's nothing I can say that would take away from them. But you have to understand it's built on a base of knowledge and study. And then he's simplifying from there. And he's probably not putting in every shadow, but he's figuring out what would really be there and then making decisions about how much of it to show. For example, here there's a low-angle light coming across Jesse Bravo's nose. You see how he's put this little dark here? How wonderful that is? Because he's done the cast shadow of the tip of his nose onto his hand. And he's done just enough. He didn't go crazy darkening the rest of this hand, though, because it would have made it join in with this background dark. And he wanted the effect of light, so that the figure is being hit by light, there's dark behind. But he put just enough there to give that volume. And he's put a thick, thick line here, because that's where the form is rounding, and you get darkness there. And here, again, is another example of low-angle lighting. See, it's the projection of her silhouette onto her father. She's hugging her father. And it's done from him imagining a lamp in this room that's at a low angle. So these are the kind of things that really, as the saying goes, separate the men from the boys. Like you see him putting in these kind of lighting cues, which you don't see in a lot of comics. I was going to do more, but I think I'm going to stop there because this has been a 45-minute video. I've got a whole bunch of other things. I don't think this is some cheesy old comic I found in the cheapo bin. It's got some okay stuff in it and a gorilla. This is DC's gorilla era. But look at this Flash. This is my humorous end note. Look at that Flash. There's something that happened to him. Was he eating too much seed oils even back then? Look at this poor guy. Like, I don't know who drew this cover. I guess I could look it up, but man, that's not a very flashy Flash. And there's the comics from back then. Look at this crazed gorilla pushing the doomsday button. He sent Negative Man into outer space forever strapped to a rocket. I mean, the cruelty, the horror. On that note, noting that there's even a contact shadow here, see off this thing. So this artist knows, he knows. He's left them out here though. Flash doesn't cast a shadow. But on that note, I'll end up my discussion of lighting, and there'll be more to come. There's lots more details to this stuff. But I hope I've pointed you in the direction of the kind of knowledge you need to evolve your drawing and make it more realistic and really give yourself more control. Because just drawing blindly, it's okay. I mean, hey, I'm a peacenik. We should have freedom. Do whatever you want. But if you're aspiring to refine your art and give it more of that old school, the good school, old school quality, whether it's Kirby or whether it's Toth, my plea is to get into some of this stuff. It may seem at first glance overly simplistic, or it may even seem boring, but believe me, it's not, because when you start studying this stuff, you can just look at all this stuff and it's like a marvel. You see the laws of light, that there are laws to this universe. There's a structure behind it. There's an order to it. It's like a wonderful order. Let's get a couple more examples quickly. There's Bally Girl. Zoom out because look at those shadows. Is that weird to be a shadow nerd? That sounds like a screen name. Maybe I should show up anonymously in forums and communities and call myself shadow nerd, but I am a bit of a shadow nerd, and it's a whole study in itself. More to come. Thanks for watching. Please do the usual if you would. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I'll see you down the road in the next video. Thank you.